each other. The game had a fully simulated economy, but it was totally destroyed by a bug that allowed players to duplicate their profits by interacting with a bugged clothing rack. In early 2008, the game was relaunched as the free-to-play title EA Land, where players could spend real money to get in-game simoleons. Custom content was finally added, but it wasn't enough. EA Land was closed down just 4 weeks after its launch. In 2003, the #1 PC game in the world made its console debut on PS2, Xbox, and GameCube. The Sims had 2 gameplay modes: the mission-based Get a Life, which had your sim try and hustle enough to move out of their mum's house, and Play the Sims mode, which was more like classic Sims freeplay. The biggest difference between the PC and console versions was that there was an object limiter on the console version, limiting the number of items a player could place in their houses. Some items in buy mode had to be unlocked in the Get a Life campaign, and houses could only have 1 floor. It also featured a rudimentary multiplayer mode. Bustin' Out, the next console release, was a very similar game, with a single-player story and a free-play mode, but this time your sim could get out of the house and visit other locations. The Urbz Sims in the City offered some tweaks to the usual Sims formula. As well as building relationships and fulfilling needs, your sim, which for some reason was now called an herb, had to build rep with other herbs to gain fame and fortune and advance to new districts in Urbzville. The Urbz was the first Sims game to feature a weather system, and its music was written and performed in Simlish by the Black Eyed Peas. It was a very different time. Like its predecessor, Sims 2 players could build and furnish homes, customize Sims with the extensive character creation tools, and guide them through their everyday lives. But unlike the first game, the Sims themselves were now a lot more complicated. In The Sims 1, they just required their basic needs to be met, but now they had personality. They would form memories and had distinct wants and fears, which would feed into an ultimate life goal. Sims could now be family or career-oriented, or they could long for money or power. Adjusting your Sims' daily routine to meet wants and avoid fears added new, challenging layers to the gameplay. If you wanted the best for your Sims, you had to work for it. But the biggest change was the addition of genetics. In The Sims 1, there was no guarantee that a child would resemble either of its parents. In 2, after a successful woohoo, the female Sim could fall pregnant, and the resulting baby would inherit not only its appearance, but aspects of its personality from both its parents. Babies could now grow up, and eventually have children of their own. Sims passed through 6 life stages, with each offering unique age-related experiences. Toddlers could be taught to walk and talk, children had to go to school, teenagers could have their first kiss, adults could marry and have their own children, and elders would eventually die. Sims would remember important life events, both positive and negative, and if they constantly met their goals, they'd live happier, longer lives. Coupled with the family tree tool, families could now be complex, with lineage, full of memories and stories that you could revisit at a glance. It allowed players to become even more invested in their Sims' lives than ever before. But it wasn't just The Sims that received some huge fan-requested changes. Players could now view the world in full 3D thanks to the game's new engine. Days of the week were added, Build and Buy mode received their share of gameplay tweaks and new objects, and Create a Sim was radically overhauled to improve Sim customization. Instead of choosing from pre-made Sim heads and clothes, it now allowed you to customize almost every aspect of your Sims, from their face and body shape to the color of their eyes. A tool called the Body Shop came packaged with the game and allowed players to create custom clothing and import it straight into Create a Sim. Sims could now have a different outfit for different occasions, and personality points and aspirations could be assigned. The Sims 2 was a hit with both critics and the players, and sold 1 million copies in just 10 days, and hitting 4.5 million by the end of its first year. But the game wasn't without its controversies. Former Florida attorney Jack Thompson called for the game to be banned, claiming that EA were promoting nudity because certain mods and cheat codes could remove the Sims' modesty blur that appeared whenever they got naked. EA were forced to respond, and they had to prove to Thompson that Sims actually didn't have genitalia. They were smooth down there like Barbie and Ken dolls. Naturally, it wasn't long before Maxis started thinking about expansion packs. With The Sims 1, they'd proved crucial in helping the developer understand what players wanted from the game's sequel, so it was no surprise that The Sims 2 would get its fair share. Over 4.5 years, 8 expansion packs were released for The Sims 2, and while packs like Pets and Bon Voyage were very similar in style and content to The Sims 1 expansions, most packs for The Sims 2 made huge changes to the game. University, the first pack, added a new life stage. Instead of transitioning straight from teen to adult, a teen could now become a young adult and study for their major at university. Nightlife was a mashup of previous packs' Hot Date and House Party. Sims now had turn-ons and turn-offs. They could go on dates, but the biggest change was that families could now own drivable cars, which meant they no longer needed to rely on the carpool to get to work. While Superstar allowed you to follow Sims to work, Open for Business expanded on that theme and allowed Sims to run their own business. Not only was the game a life simulator, it was now a business simulator. Sims needed to hire and train employees, earn skills, and keep stock levels steady. Other expansions worked really well with Open for Business. You could sell cars if you had nightlife, produce you'd grown in Seasons, or even the pets from Pets. Seasons finally added weather to the game. Maxis had originally wanted it implemented for launch, but there was a bug that caused it to rain indoors. They couldn't get it fixed in time, so the idea eventually turned into the hook of the 5th expansion. Other packs enabled Sims to have four-legged friends, go on holiday, take up hobbies, or just live in an apartment instead of living in a house. But you could become a witch who lived in an apartment. Custom content was still huge for The Sims 2, and there were tons of places you could download new items, Sims, and home lots from. Realizing how hungry the audience was for new things, Maxis began to release themed stuff packs. These were cheaper than the expansions, but included a load of new items. There were 9 stuff packs for The Sims 2, including a tie-in with clothing brand H&M, as well as everyone's favourite flat pack furniture store, IKEA. The Sims' enormous success meant that the game had well and truly permeated the public conscious, and nowhere is this more apparent than with the game's music. Its popularity helped draw in some big names. Mark Mothersbaugh of the pop band Devo composed the main score, and stars like Lily Allen, the Pussycat Dolls, Natasha Bedingfield, and Katy Perry all recorded Simlish versions of their hits to use in the game. It also meant that versions of the game were appearing on more and more platforms. The base game was ported to home consoles, and some expansions like Pets were ported as standalone games to handhelds like the PSP and Game Boy Advance. Three games under the banner Sims Stories were released between 2007 and 2008, where you could play through the story mode of pre-made Sims before creating and playing your own. The Stories games were mere tasters, specifically geared towards people whose PCs maybe weren't high-spec enough to run the main games. From 2006, development of The Sims was gradually moved away from Maxis and given to The Sims Studio, a new division created solely to work on The Sims. This meant that Maxis were freed up to work on a new Sim City and an entirely new project. At GDC 2005, Will Wright announced that he was working on Spore, a simulation that would allow players to control life on an unbelievable scale, from the cellular to the galactic. You could create a microscopic organism and control their development and evolution through 5 stages, observing the emergence of their intelligence, social capabilities, and eventually their ascension into space. Spore released in 2008 to a positive critical reception, and the game sold 1 million copies in 1 week. However, EA's implementation of strict DRM software SecureROM resulted in a huge fan backlash, and a class action lawsuit was filed by disgruntled gamers. Spore received an expansion and a couple of spin-offs, but it marked the last game Wright would work on at Maxis. He left in 2009 to a small startup called Stupid Fun Club, an entertainment development studio where the ideas they came up with could be manifested in other media like video games. In 2011, he joined the board of directors on The Sims Online's old competitor, Second Life. While he hasn't been in the public eye with new gaming projects in recent years, Wright's contribution to video games cannot be understated. In 2001, he won the Lifetime Achievement Award at GDC, and in 2007 became the first game designer to be awarded a BAFTA Fellowship. His ideas changed the way we think about video games and brought gaming to a whole new audience. launched in June 2009. It came with the usual expected improvements to create a sim. You could now adjust almost every aspect of your sim's appearance, right down to their voice. There was a slight switch up in sim behavior, and a substantial change to build and buy mode that allowed more placement options for items, including the ability to recolor and repattern furniture at will. But it was the neighborhood that received the biggest upgrade. It became seamless. Now previously, when you wanted to send your sim somewhere else, such as a community lot, you'd meet a loading screen between the two areas. Now all you had to do was zoom out from the sim's home lot, and you'd be on the neighborhood map without a loading screen in sight. If you sent your sim to work, you could now follow their journey across the neighborhood. And to make The Sims 3 feel more like an actual living world, there was an optional new feature called Story Progression, which meant that all the Sims in the neighborhood would continue on with their lives without your input. It meant that some Sims, even ones from families that you'd created, could die, form new relationships, and even have children. Sure, it meant that you had to relinquish some control, but it made the world come alive. And let's face it, you'd probably already moved on from those old families anyway. The exchange was improved to make it even easier to create and share custom content with other players. While there were a myriad of free items to download, there was also an official online store, featuring exclusive content that could only be bought with sim points, which could be purchased with, you guessed it, real-world money. One of the things now available to purchase were worlds, and you could buy 11 new worlds from the store, each at an eye-watering $20. Players could also use the Create a World tool to make their own if they didn't want to spend money. And if you liked expansion packs, then boy was The Sims 3 for you. EA shipped 11 over 4 years. Most were inspired by previous packs, so you had the usual: pets, seasons, a couple of holiday packs, and a chance for Sims to go to university. Some, like Showtime, added new ways to interact with your real-life friends, with in-game messaging and the ability to send your star Sim on tour into your friend's game. Of all the expansions, Into the Future was the only one that offered a really original take, offering a futuristic vibe and new items to make your Sims' lives easier. The Sims 3 also had 9 stuff packs, including high-end loft stuff, town life stuff, and Katy Perry's sweet treats. Perry had been involved in The Sims 2, recording Hot and Cold in Simlish for the Apartment Life trailer. However, her stuff pack was slightly controversial, in that it was double the price of regular ones, perhaps due to the cost of Perry's licensing fees. Critics and fans alike praised the openness of the game, and The Sims 3 was another enormous success for EA, selling 1.4 million copies in its first week, the largest PC game launch the publisher had ever seen. With The Sims train showing no sign of slowing down, more spin-offs were to be expected, like the cutesy My Sims series, aimed at younger players, which by itself has spawned 5 sequels.
Welcome to The Sims Medieval. Right now, I'm a king, and my castle is tight. But you know what? Right now, I'm feeling barbarian.
In 2011, The Sims went medieval. This game was a weird mashup between The Sims and a regular RPG. It was quest-driven with a lot of peril like plague, peasant revolts, and duels. You could create your own character and complete quests to build up your kingdom to a defined end goal. Sims only had 2 needs that you needed to keep track of: hunger and energy, and they didn't pass through life stages. You also couldn't really build anything anymore. You were given a bunch of pre-made castles and buildings, and you could decorate them, but if you wanted to be a castle architect, then you were out of luck. Back in the halcyon days of 2011, when everyone you knew was sending you Farmville invites, you could also bother your Facebook friends with The Sims Social. It was a browser-based version of the game that utilized the social network to send and receive items between your and your friends' versions of the game in order to complete quests. With 16 million players in its first week, it quickly became one of the most popular games on Facebook. However, due to a bunch of bugs and a lack of new content, meant that it quickly dropped in the ranks. It was closed down just 2 years later. The mobile game, The Sims FreePlay, is still updated regularly and differs from main Sims games in that it uses real time. There's no speeding up time here. 1 real-world minute is 1 in-game minute, and activities and interactions all take time. In 2013, Maxis released a reboot of SimCity. It featured a new engine called Glassbox, which promised a more detailed simulation than previous games. However, the game's launch was a disaster. SimCity required a persistent internet connection to play even the single-player mode, and there were multiple network outages, meaning that many were disconnected from their game or experienced crashes and even the loss of their saves. Understandably, fans lost a lot of faith in Maxis and EA.